So one of the people arrested in the post-riots crackdown was a woman called Bernadette Spofforth. She's quite famous on Twitter. She was arrested on suspicion of spreading false communication and of stirring up racial hatred. Thankfully, her arrest has been dropped. The police are going to take no further action. Tom, do you want to tell us a little bit about this case? I mean, she was essentially believed to have been central in sort of spreading the misinformation around, the identity of the suspect of the Southport stabber.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the wake of the Southport killings, there was this name which began to do the rounds on social media, Ali al-Shikati. There was this claim that this person was the killer. It was obviously falsely claimed that he had come to the UK on a small boat, that he might have been on an MI6 watch list, that he might have been known to the authorities also as mentally ill. Spofforth basically has been named and presented as one of the people who, if not the original source of the claim, certainly someone who was instrumental in spreading them.
Yeah. There's
been a whole lot of reporting which has tried to trace it back. Many people believe she was the first person to tweet about it. She herself says that she claimed that she got it from someone on the ground in Southport, this particular name. Later on told the Times that she saw it from another ex-user. That ex-user has since challenged that claim. So there's a whole array of sort of points here. The main thing is she did post that tweet.
Yeah.
It did seemingly become picked up by a lot of various different accounts who were boosting it. She deleted it an hour later, effectively apologised for it, but nevertheless, just slightly more than a week after posting that in the wake of the Southport killing, she was visited by the police. She was arrested. According to her account, she was held for 36 hours whilst they were trying to draw enough evidence. And now, because of a lack of evidence, they have said there'll be no further action. And I think this was a particularly unsettling case for many people, because whilst on the one hand, to spread that kind of information, to not look to corroborate any of those details, despite how even a quick Google would have revealed that, first of all, Shikati seems to just mean my apartment in Arabic, if you roughly translate it. MI6 don't have domestic terrorism watch lists. MI5 deal with domestic terrorism. There's all sorts of things that, if considering the size of your following, you could do pretty minor due diligence and realise that what you were spreading was sort of inflammatory misinformation, effectively.
Yeah.
It's still, I think, concerned and resonated with people because this was the police going after someone primarily for talking nonsense on social media, for spreading untruths. Granted, with this sort of proviso that if this is true, all hell was going to break loose, as Spofforth put it. But nevertheless, it was one of those things, realised that whilst we've had offences like this on the books for some time, it does feel increasingly that we're moving into the space of the police feeling it's their responsibility and the authorities feeling it's their responsibility to, first of all, kind of manage public discussion of horrendous crimes, terrorist incidents and what have you in real time. And by manage, I mean kind of clamp down hard on what is deemed to be misinformation. And that, as part of that, inevitably, it draws them into the business of deciding and punishing what is and isn't true. And that does feel like a Rubicon we're crossing at the moment, both in terms of what the police are doing, even though it didn't go any further in this place, but also what the demands that are now being piled on social media companies again to do. So as ever, you don't have to defend the action of thoughtlessly spreading something that you might have heard third hand or might have seen doing the rounds on the internet with no thoughts of the consequences. You don't have to defend that, but you certainly have to be appalled by the fact that the state and the police are becoming increasingly in the role of being arbiters of truth, effectively, and all to the end of managing public discussion of certain issues in quite a paternalistic fashion.
Yeah, managing public feeling. Inaya, what have you made of it?
Yeah, I mean, it seems now increasingly that, it could be a crime, or you could be prosecuted or, investigated by the police for being ignorant and wrong. And don't get me wrong, I think it was very, very wrong-headed, all of the people that shared those claims without really a shred of evidence. But the reality is that as human beings, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to jump on fads. We're going to, share things that might be misleading sometimes. And that should not be a police matter. And quite frankly, during the riots as they were unfolding, there were people that were saying that, for example, Muslim women had acid thrown at her.
Yeah.
And some of those people, I think a gentleman that works for Hope Not Hate,
Nick Lowles.
Nick Lowles, there's not really been any consequences, for him in that respect. So it's not only just ridiculous to be prosecuting people without investigating them, but what an extraordinary waste of police resources and police time when we look at some of the things that's actually causing a lot of, anxiety and frustration in society, the de facto decriminalization of so many crimes. And then this is what we're seeing people being pursued at for. But again, it's often this kind of low-hanging fruit as well, because undoubtedly spreading that misinformation is wrong. But at the same time, I think there are, again, deeper questions at play, which political leaders like Keir Starmer will just refuse to discuss. Why is it that actually that claim did actually go viral as well? I think part of it, is partly because in some instances, it almost rang true for some people. Now, that doesn't mean that it's okay what happened. But the reality is there is clearly, a sense in society that there are certain patterns or repetitive things happen in society that they can kind of pit on certain people. Now, that's wrong, what's happened, but there's no deeper kind of questioning or trying to address that deeper reason. So I think it's just another demonstration of the increasing just authoritarian age that we're in, that every issue, every civic issue, social issue is now going to become like a police matter. Yeah,
it's very worrying. And there is, as you say, Inaya, there are reasons why that rumour was able to catch hold, not just because of the pattern, but also because actually this is not the police or the authorities' fault, but the fact that in this terrible case, the suspect was underage and therefore his name couldn't be revealed for the best part of a week. And that information vacuum, that invites people to speculate, unfortunately. And they speculated with something that we know in the past the police have tried to suppress. I mean, there was literally, a terror attack in Hartlepool involving, was it an asylum seeker from Morocco?
Yeah.
And, that was covered up by the police. So I don't want to excuse misinformation, but you can see, you can see why people would buy into it, because that.
And that's just, we've just got to be frank about that. But and that's what's so frustrating, again, are, people in the political class, decision makers in government, at least from a public perspective, refuse to have that conversation outright. And so you leave this space open for people to then, fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
And that, I think, makes it more likely that people are going to get things massively wrong.
And also why people distrust the authorities in the first place. Now, it's not to say that that is entirely healthy. They're particularly on the part of the kind of bigger influencers in this slightly cranky or crank adjacent sort of space. I'm not necessarily talking about them, but certainly people maybe within their audience, people who are trying to make sense of what's going on, wondering why the information wasn't forthcoming. It's also worth mentioning that the police were relatively quick in trying to just sketch out some of the details of the actual Southport attacker, saying that he was born in Cardiff to Rwandan parents and so on. But at the same time, even that didn't necessarily convince anyone. There was still that level of distrust. Now, on the one hand, one shouldn't just say that excuses people from, believing whatever they read on the internet or whatever. But first of all, we're still talking about a relatively small amount of people, but also it's worth trying to get to grips with why is there such distrust in the first place. And what was interesting about the way in which the information about the Southport killer was handled was that eventually they did reveal his name and identity before his 18th birthday.
Yeah.
Because they realized it got to a certain point where this, it'd become untenable to withhold this information anymore. If that kind of conversation had happened earlier, a lot of things could have been avoided. And also, as many people have pointed out, this is a way in which they try to manage the situation. There is a presumption that if you provide too much information up front, that you're either going to fuel the fire, or you're also going to potentially gin up some kind of backlash.
Yeah.
And I think it's as a precise consequence of that it creates this vacuum that we've been talking about. And it's also, I think, especially in the kind of online sphere, because there has been over the years people who have been censored on social media, or who have even been, demonized by the authorities for, say, during COVID and lockdown, saying things which actually later turned out to be, if not true, then certainly plausible. There's a lot of people who are struggling to believe what the authorities tell them. So rather than interrogate that and try to work out what has created a climate which is more amenable to these kinds of things to spread and to take root, there's just this reflexive police response, which is only going to fuel the problem further, it feels like.